Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, esteemed professors, doctors, guests, colleagues, and participants from all over the world. Welcome to the Effects of Climate Change on Child Health webinar, a joint collaboration between the International Pediatric Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, Indonesian Pediatric Society, and the Turkish National Pediatric Society. Uniting over 1,700 registrants from all over the world, the Effects of Climate Change on Child Health webinar discusses climate change from the perspective of its impact on child health to better equip not only pediatricians and healthcare professionals, but also the general population with the understanding, knowledge, and tools needed to take action to protect our children and their future. Before beginning today's webinar, we will first and foremost share the rundown of today's webinar. We will begin with a welcoming address from the President of the International Pediatric Association, followed by our honorable keynote speaker. Then we will have the presentations from our distinguished panel of experts, moderated by our esteemed moderators. Today's webinar will then be concluded by a question and answer session. For the smooth running of today's event, kindly pay attention to the following rules and regulations. Participants are encouraged to have their videos turned on throughout the webinar. Participants should keep their microphones off unless permitted by the moderators. And to obtain the certificate of attendance, participants are required to attend the entire duration of the webinar and fill in a feedback form which will be distributed at the end of the event. We will now proceed to the first agenda of this webinar, which is an opening remarks or an opening address from Professor Enver Hasanoglu as the president of the IPA. It is my great honor to be able to introduce Prof. Hasanoglu at today's webinar. Professor Enver Hasanoglu, MD, FA-AAP, is the President of the International Pediatric Association, Secretary General of the Turkish National Pediatric Society, Secretary General of the Union of Middle Eastern and Mediterranean Pediatric Societies. He has also held the rectorship position in Gazi University, Ankara, Turkey between 1992 to 2000. He was the Dean of the Medical School for the 9 years and a member of Turkish Higher Education Council for 4 years. For the past 20 years, he has been involved in many programs in Turkey and in the Middle East region, especially on immigrant child health matters. He has been awarded many honorary fellowship titles by various societies across the world for his tireless work and contributions to child health. Without further ado, to the professor who needs no introduction, to Professor Hasanoglu, the time and screen is yours.
Thank you, Helena, for your kind words. Dear colleagues and friends and participants, as president of IPA, International Pediatric Association, I would like to welcome you all to the Effect of Climate Change in Children webinar, which organized by us by International Pediatric Association, Turkish National Pediatric Society, American Academy of Pediatrics, and Indonesian Pediatric Society. WHO has already listed climate change among the most important 10 health threats in 2019. The current situation is drastic for many children, according to UNICEF's report. The report reveals that 1 billion of children are at extremely high risk of the impact of climate change, and this is nearly half of all children. It has been reported that almost all children on the earth is exposed to at least one climate and environmental hazards: heat waves, cyclones, air pollutions, and flooding and water scarcity. Children are more vulnerable and bear the greatest burden of climate change as they are growing and developing. Due to climate change, we not only have extreme weather, toxic hazards, and diseases, but increasingly catastrophic droughts, fires, and storms, which also affects food and water system. Dear colleagues, as the injustice for the reach of COVID-19 vaccines, climate change effects create another injustice and inequities. IPA working for every child, every age, everywhere, to leave no child behind. For that, IPA calls all of you, all pediatric societies, pediatricians, and child health workers to advocate and raise their voice against this injustice in their local and national and international platform, and work hardly for sustainable solution against this problem. I believe this webinar will contribute to advocating for and working in collaboration against this problem. I would like to thank the speakers, whom all are competent on their fields and on their subjects. And also, I would like to thank American Academy of Pediatrics, Indonesian Pediatric Societies, and Turkish National Pediatric Society for their collaboration. And thanks once more to you for your attendance to this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hasanoglu, for your opening remarks. We will now proceed to the next agenda of the webinar. Today, we are very honored to have the next speaker deliver the keynote speech of today's webinar, Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin, the Minister of Health of the Republic of Indonesia. Without further ado, we now respectfully invite Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin to give the keynote speech. To Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin, the time and screen is yours.
President of the International Pediatrician Association, Executive Director of International Pediatricians Associations, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Over the past 125,000 years, never had ever our planet been warmer than it has. Climatic factors indeed affect the risk of transmissions of vector-borne diseases such as dengue and malaria. The more intense and the more frequent rainy days we have, the higher dengue cases we find. As you know better than I do, when it comes to dengue and malaria infections, children are physically more vulnerable than any other groups. They are more at risk to health complications, including death, compared to adults. We at the Ministry of Health has instigated a participatory-oriented community-based climate change adaptation program to address the spread of dengue fever and malaria. And amidst the pandemic, we have also started to expand COVID-19 vaccination coverage to children older than 6 years old. Currently, 70% of the targeted children has received the first dose of vaccine, while 38% of the target has their full dose completed. We hope that in the long run, this will ease the work of our pediatricians who have been fighting the current pandemic relentlessly. Ladies and gentlemen, no one among us wants to see our children being at risk of contracting climate-sensitive diseases. As parents, we all want to be on the right side of history, seeing our children spend their childhood pursuing their dreams, not to worrying the future of our planet. As pediatricians, I believe that you prefer to see children reach their full potential rather than to deal with climate-sensitive diseases. While keeping our endeavor to protect our children from the COVID-19 on the right track, Let us synergize and act together in improving our children's health status, hence preventing them from the risk of contracting climate-sensitive diseases. Ladies and gentlemen, let us act together to reduce the number of children affected by the climate change and climate-sensitive diseases. We owe this to our children, hence to the children of our children too. With this, I would like to congratulate every one of you for today's webinar on effects of climate change in children. I wish you all an inspiring encounters and productive exchange of ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin, for your inspiring reminder to us all. The next agenda of our webinar will be moderated by two very special and distinguished guests. It is my great honor today to introduce our moderators for this session. Professor Aman Bakti Pulungan, MD, PhD, FAAP, FRCPI Honors, is the Executive Director of the International Pediatric Association, President of the Asia Pacific Pediatric Association, NCD Child Governing Council, and past President of the Indonesian Pediatric Society and the Asia Pacific Pediatric Endocrine Society. He is also a professor in pediatrics at the Department of Child Health, Faculty of Medicine, University of Indonesia, Cipto Mangunkusumo Hospital. For the past 20 years, he has been involved in many programs for diabetes and child health in Indonesia and across the globe. He has also been awarded by the Indonesian Ministry of Health as one of the most eminent person who has been actively involved in a national immunization program, as an honorary fellowship by the Turkish National Pediatric Association for dedication and contribution to child health, and as an honorary fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Ireland. Recently, Prof. Aman has also received the Republica.co.id Inspirational Figure Award for 2021 for his work in children's health during the COVID-19 pandemic. Good evening, Professor Aman.
Hi, hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. Thank you, Adeta.
Thank you, Professor Aman. We will now introduce the second moderator of the session. Dr. Jenna Patterson is the Senior Vice President of Global Child Health and Life Support for the American Academy of Pediatrics, where she leads the global training and implementation programs. With her leadership, the team has launched a new virtual reality product and a textbook for pediatric emergencies, created a newborn training program with the World Health Organization, and created a network of immunization champions in Africa and Asia. Prior to joining the American Academy of Pediatrics, Dr. Patterson was a senior program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she managed a $120 million portfolio of grants on maternal and newborn health, with work surrounding the etiology of newborn and preterm infant illness, prevention and management of preterm birth, antenatal corticosteroid implementation research, amongst others. She has also published extensively in the peer-reviewed literature, in addition to many webinars, workshops, and speaking engagements. Good morning, Dr. Jenna Patterson.
Good morning.
Now to Dr. Thank you, Dr. Patterson. To Dr. Patterson, the time and screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here today to talk about this very important topic. And it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Aparna Bol. Dr. Bol is a pediatrician at the Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital and an associate professor of pediatrics at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. She is interested in the intersection between environmental stewardship, environmental justice, and pediatric public health. She is currently the chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Environmental Health and Climate Change, and she has served in numerous environmental health leadership roles, including co-chair of the Healthcare Without Harm Board of Directors, a member of the State of Ohio's Lead Advisory Council, the Lead Safe Cleveland Coalition Steering Committee, and the Trust for Public Lands Ohio Advisory Council, in addition to the Ohio Environmental Council's Board of Directors. She was a founding advisory council member of the Ohio Clinicians for Climate Action. She's an activist in her state of Ohio, but she is also a world-renowned speaker on environmental health for children. And we welcome your introductory talk. Thank you so much, Dr. Bol. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Patterson. I am going to work on sharing my screen. Okay. Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you this morning. What an honor to join colleagues from around the world to address this critical topic for child health. My goal in my introductory remarks will be to provide a high-level overview of some of the key health impacts of climate change on children, and conclude with some comments about solutions and what we as pediatricians can do to advance climate action in our practice and as leaders in healthcare delivery. Historically, climate change has been conceptualized, I think, often as an issue that affects, for example, polar bears in the Arctic Circle 50 years from now, another species, another time, another place. And as our keynote speaker said, in fact, climate change is a clear and present risk to child health. And that's why I'm proud that the American Academy of Pediatrics in the United States was the first of American medical professional societies to issue a formal call to action in the form of a policy statement about the fact that climate action is really a child health imperative, because climate change poses a threat to the health, safety, and security of all children, children being uniquely vulnerable to these threats. We understand that taking prompt and substantive action is a matter of health equity and child health justice. To provide an overview of some of the key child health impacts that we think about when we consider climate change's current and future effects on children. First, effects on air quality. Rising surface temperatures result in increasing formation of surface ozone or smog. As we know, ozone is a good thing in the atmosphere, but poses health risks when breathed in on the surface, especially for children. Can both cause and exacerbate chronic lung disease, can influence birth outcomes, contributing to preterm birth and low birth weight, can contribute to increased susceptibility to respiratory infections, including outcomes from COVID-19, and also is associated with premature death. Also worth pointing out that another climate change fueled contributor to poor air quality are increasingly severe and frequent wildfires, such as those we've been seeing in the western part of North America. The air pollution from wildfires, including particulate matter, have some of these same impacts on child health. Longer and more intense heat waves are being seen around the world, including here in North America, and actually extreme heat is the leading cause of weather-related death here in the United States. We've seen here in North America and elsewhere how heat waves can stress healthcare systems and first responders when we have vulnerable individuals, including young infants, who can be susceptible to the health consequences of these extreme heat events. The warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture, so that when precipitation events occur, they're stronger. We see these in stronger storm events. We're seeing them here in my part of the Great Lakes region of the United States. These extreme precipitation events can cause property damage and displacement, which can have catastrophic consequences for children as their community infrastructure is destroyed. As the keynote speaker mentioned, we can see the spread of waterborne and vector-borne diseases under these conditions. And we can also see that under these conditions, stormwater runoff can affect water quality. The picture on the lower right is of the Great Lake that I live near to, which is Lake Erie, where agricultural runoff and these extreme precipitation events combined with increased surface water temperatures has resulted in the blooms of toxic algae, which threaten drinking water in our part of the state. Changing patterns of vector-borne disease, again, as was mentioned earlier, including tick-borne diseases and mosquito-borne diseases. Of course, the factors that contribute to the distribution of disease-carrying vectors are complex, but climate change can certainly play a role by affecting the season of these vectors, the distribution of their range, their life cycle, and their host-seeking behaviors. Climate change also has an influence on food systems and on food quality. You know, we think about climate fuel disasters disrupting food security and food distribution, and that's certainly true. But it's also significant from a global health perspective that climate change influences the nutrient density of really important food crops, including, for example, iron content and protein content in food staples like rice, which clearly can have some significant child health consequences where these food crops are important staples in the diet. Mental health is another important consideration when we think about child health and climate change. We see children suffering from post-traumatic stress following climate-fueled disasters like the hurricanes we've experienced in our part of the globe. In addition, we have children concerned about their future, worrying about inheriting a livable planet. And sometimes people call that eco-anxiety. So how do we talk to children about that? How do we stand in solidarity with young people to fight for a livable planet so that they have an opportunity to grow and thrive? The good news is that climate solutions provide immediate benefits to child health. There are immediate child health harms from the burning of fossil fuels. And by transitioning to a clean energy, we see immediate benefits in cleaner air, promoting healthier lungs, healthier brain development. When we design communities and cities that support multiple modes of transportation and have safe spaces for children to play, we are promoting social connections and social capital at the same time that we are decreasing air pollution. When we invest in more sustainable food systems and promote healthy plant-forward diets, we are providing immediate child health benefits and also planetary benefits. So I think there's a lot of good news and a lot of hope around the immediate child health benefits of accelerating climate action. So briefly, I just want to touch on what we can do as pediatricians. What can we do to advance climate solutions? This is a big planetary problem. So what's our role as clinicians? Luckily, I think there's so much that we can contribute. As advocates, our voices are uniquely credible in framing climate change as a child health issue and climate action as a child health imperative, which I think is incredibly important. There's a lot we can do in our clinical practice to integrate sort of climate-informed care into the care that we provide for patients. There's much we can do as educators and also to advance climate action in healthcare delivery. So I'll briefly sort of review these in conclusion. Here, we have done quite a bit of work to mobilize pediatricians as climate advocates. We have climate advocate pediatricians in all 50 states and in Puerto Rico here in the United States. We've been working together to advocate for climate action in regional, local, and national policy and working together on education and other endeavors as well. There's much that we do already in the care of our patients that can be informed by our knowledge of climate change effects on children. As a few examples, when we counsel children and families about healthy nutrition, we can counsel about healthy plant-forward diets. When we encounter families experiencing challenges with heating and cooling their homes, we can connect families often with resources to help with home weatherization. We can connect the dots between energy efficiency and health. We can counsel families about active transportation to help them with their physical activity and healthfulness, but also that's a benefit for the planet. We can also connect the dots for families and children about the effects of climate change and air quality on their health when they ask us about the severity of their allergies, when they're experiencing asthma exacerbations. And that sort of platform is, I think, incredibly important for building the collective will that we need to act on climate. As educators, this is a busy slide, I know, but there was a recent publication about how we can integrate climate consciousness and climate health information into residency training for pediatric trainees. This is an example, this table here, of how existing learning objectives for pediatric residency training can be infused with content about climate change and health. We've also been working on educational modules for continuing education for pediatricians. For example, we have a new module through the American Board of Pediatrics, which is on the impact of climate change on pediatric healthcare that pediatricians can undertake for their maintenance of certification. I want to conclude by just offering some examples of how we can advance climate action within the health sector. The healthcare sector globally contributes significantly to global greenhouse gas emissions, the cause of human-fueled climate change. And we in healthcare have an incredible opportunity to reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions, to really live our mission, to do no harm, and to help our communities to thrive. And there is really a global movement around decarbonizing the healthcare sector here in the United States and around the world. The visual on the left is of a recent report that sort of outlines what this looks like globally. The healthcare sector produces greenhouse gases for a lot of reasons. We heat and cool our buildings, we transport people and products. Our operating rooms produce anesthetic gases that are wasted. We are big purchasers of consumer products and food, and we also produce waste. And for every one of these examples, there are opportunities for us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Increasingly, hospitals are investing in this kind of work. Here in the United States, there are hundreds of hospitals that have joined a climate council to collectively commit to climate action. And collectively, these hospitals have a ton of power. They have a big platform, and they also have a big purchasing impact. And so they can really move markets around energy, sustainable food, and products. There is a global initiative around climate smart healthcare that is called the Global Green and Healthy Hospitals Initiative. It is an initiative of an organization called Healthcare Without Harm. I've put the web address down at the bottom of this slide. And this initiative really invites participating hospitals to look at 10 goals around climate action and environmental stewardship, including engaging leadership, purchasing safer chemicals, reducing waste and managing it more sustainably, energy efficiency and clean energy investments, water efficiency, transportation efficiency, sustainable and healthy food purchasing, healthy and safe disposal of pharmaceuticals, green buildings and energy efficient buildings, and sustainable purchasing efforts. And these goals are outlined further on this web address. Hospitals and health systems around the world are invited to join. Already about 1,500 members exist across the world, representing over 40,000 hospitals and health centers. I will conclude there, and we'll look forward to questions and conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you, Dr. Bol. So for the second speaker, I would like to invite our speaker from Turkey, Professor Osman. The topic will be climate crisis and early childhood development. Professor Osman received her medical doctorate degree from University Faculty of Medicine and completed her residency training in the same institution. She received a PhD degree in social pediatrics from the same university in 2000. And since 2003, she is working as a professor of pediatrics in the same Faculty of Medicine. She has been the Vice Director of the University Institute of Child Health between 2004 until 2012, Associate Dean of the University Faculty of Medicine between 2009 and 2012, and Head of the Department of Pediatrics between 2015 and 2021. Currently, the Director of University Institute of Child Health. She was certified as the Turkish National Pediatric Society since 2015. She is the author to more than 180 international national articles or book chapters. Her specific areas of research and study on nutrition, environment, development, and developmental disorder. After the Syrian refugee crisis in Turkey, she is also actively working in the area of refugee with Turkish National Pediatric Society. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Osman. Time is yours, Elif.
Thank you very much, Dr. Plungan, for this nice introduction. I will also try to share my presentation first. And while I'm doing that, I would like to welcome all the participants, and I would like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And I would like to thank IPA and other societies for the organization of the webinar and for their kind invitation. During my presentation, I would just try to focus a little bit more of the effects of climate change on early childhood development. Just shortly, climate change is the shift in the temperatures and the weather patterns. And we know that although this is a natural process, unfortunately, since 1800s, the main reason has been the human activities, especially the burning fossil fuels and the excess carbon dioxide emissions. As a result, we are now currently experiencing the sudden, moderate, maybe slower, and we are going to experience much more environmental degradation related to the climate change. Well, this is a diagram from CDC. Yes, we have the climate change. We have the extreme weather, severe weather, air pollution, vector changes, increasing allergens, disruption in water quality, decreased water and food supplies, and environmental degradation. And as a result, directly or indirectly, we have several health effects, starting from mortality, increased mortality, morbidities, non-communicable diseases, infectious diseases, malnutrition, and mental health issues. But I would like to discuss this subject under the framework of nurturing care, because we know that nurturing care is not something related with survival and thrival, but also for the fulfilling of the full potential of all children. And it has five important components, five main components: good health, adequate nutrition, responsive caregiving, security and safety, and opportunities for early learning and education. And yes, as the keynote speaker has just mentioned, we have just received the UNICEF climate crisis report, and according to that report, all children on the earth are exposed to at least one environmental hazard, shock, or stress, and unfortunately 1/3 of the children are exposed to at least 4 of those. And yes, they are experiencing it in a very different way. Well, this slide has been adapted from two sources, one from the UNICEF climate crisis report and the other from the Lancet review about the future of the children. Well, here we see the most lucky 20 countries as for the environmental risks. And here we have the 20 countries which have the highest environmental risks. These countries, besides having the lowest environmental risk, they also have the lowest child vulnerability index. However, countries over there have the highest or high child vulnerability indexes. And here we have 4.5 million children under 5. Here we have 80 times more, 372 million children under 5. And here, those countries, most of them have excess carbon dioxide emissions, which is below the 2030 target. And here we have the countries which have mostly have excess carbon dioxide emissions at 300 or 200% more according to the 2030 target. So I believe that we have to discuss the effects of climate in the framework of early childhood development, because they are both for today and for the future. They are both urgent. They both have pervasive inequalities. They both need multi and transdisciplinary approach. They both are an issue of child rights. And unfortunately, nearly 90% of the global burden of disease related to climate change will be on children under 5 years of age. So further on, I will just shortly try to summarize the effects of climate change in those specific areas. I will not be talking about the lack of clean water, which I all believe that we all know that will be affecting all those 5 components especially there will be another effect, adverse effect, but I will not go into that details. So for health, I will start with survival. Unfortunately, today we know that half of the deaths under 5 years of age are during the neonatal period, and the most important reason are preterm birth complications. When we come to 1 to 59 months of age children, pneumonia and diarrheal diseases are still the #1 killers of the children. And what are we going to expect from the climate change? Currently, still, due to air pollution, we had about 7 million deaths. And among those 7 million deaths, half of the million were were during the neonatal period. So we have two age ranges, one the neonatal period and one the elderly, which will be much more affected. And all when we come to the all-cause deaths of neonatal period, 20% were due to air pollution, and still we see that most of them were in the sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia region. Of course, not only the neonatal deaths will be related with air pollution, but all the respiratory diseases that we are going to see under 5 years of age, especially again pneumonia, will be just much more exacerbated due to the climate change and increased air pollution. But that will be not the only case. For example, a study in New York has shown us that those babies who have been exposed to air pollution in utero had 4 points less IQ points at 5 years of age compared to their peers. And yes, climate change will not only lead to neonatal mortality, but we will have more preterm births, both due to air pollution and to extreme heat waves. Well, extreme heat waves has been calculated to cause 25,000 not preterm, but early births currently. And it has been again calculated that we lose 150,000 days, gestational days, to extreme heat waves. If we are not going to do anything, that will just increase the 250,000 gestational days until the end of this century. And we also know that still preterm births are the #1 killers, and they have many mortalities and morbidities, all to lifelong effect. Diarrheal diseases are still #2 killers for children 1 and 59 years of age. A meta-analysis study has shown that for every 1 degree increase in weather, we will have an increase in bacterial, protozoal, and all-cause diarrheal diseases, and that will be seen in low-income, high-income, temperate zone, or tropical zone countries. And this will add up to 48,000 additional deaths under 15 years of age until 2030. Malaria is an important under 5 killer. And in 2019, we had all malarial deaths had 67% were in children under 5 years of age. It is estimated to increase by 10 to 15% if we do not have the appropriate measures for climate change. And again, the malaria zones will just move down towards Eastern and Southern Africa, where they do not have enough infrastructure to be able to handle the new cases. So that will just add up to increased numbers. Well, adequate nutrition is an important part of nurturing care, not only for survival, but also for early childhood development and for brain development. Malnutrition will have effects on cortex and hippocampus development. Stunting, it will have a biological injury and disruption to early brain development. It will decrease schooling, it will decrease economic output, and it will be just passed to the next generations. Obesity is an inflammatory process which already is related with cognitive disorders, and we need many micronutrients so that neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, myelinization, and neurotransmitter synthesis could be just appropriate. And unfortunately, children are not growing well. Every child, 1 in 3 children, are stunted, underweight, obese, or have micronutrient deficiency. And as you can see, they are much more located in the areas where also have the highest risk of environmental hazards. And what are we expecting? Currently in India, in areas where there's a high vulnerability for environment, there are already much more children stunted, wasted, or anemic. But if we do not have the measures enough, then we will have additional 100,000 children under 5 years of age who are going to die due to undernutrition. And by 2050, severe stunting will increase by 62%. And by the end of the century, those areas in the world, Africa, who already have 40% of nutritional problems, will have an additional 30% more undernutrition. And yes, we have to talk about that as a global syndemic. Undernutrition, obesity, and climate change, because they're all happening at the same time, at the same place. They share consequences and they share reasons. And also we are expecting to have much more people to become poor. And at least 1/4 of them are going to be poor because of the food prices due to climate change. And again, we know that severe food insecurity leads to undernutrition, but moderate or mild food and food insecurity will lead to obesity, which also both will have its consequences related with development. Children need safety and security. They have to be protected from conflict, migration, pollution, environmental toxins, abuse, neglect, and accidents. Accidents are going to increase. And currently, we have approximately 90 million displaced people, and 55 million are internally displaced. Among those 55 million people who are internally displaced, 7 million are now due to disasters. But in 2020, we had 40 million internally displaced people due to disasters. That was 30 million. So the number of internal displacement due to disasters are increasing. And currently, the yet 7 million people who have been displaced, 7 million are under 5 years of age. And it has been estimated that if we don't have a sustainable development, if we don't have a sustainable environment, only the displacements related with flooding will increase by 4 times until the end of the century. And we already have environmental degradation. Yes, 1/3 of all the children around the world have blood dead levels about 5 micrograms deciliter. We have a really important environmental pollution with pesticides, and we have an increasing risk with endocrine disruptors. And not a new study has calculated the IQ point loss due to environmental pollution, lead, mercury, and organophosphates, and that add up to the total loss of preterm and autism spectrum disorders. Well, we are expecting much more preterm births. We are expecting much more environmental disruption, so that will add up to a higher numbers. In a small study that we have conducted in Turkey, we have also shown that children who had blood dead levels above 4 microgram deciliter had 8 times more risk of having under normal IQ. Well, having under normal IQ, of course, is a problem for the individual, but what does that mean for the society? Just 5 points shift means 57% increase in mentally retarded people in that society. Well, responsive caregiving is important for the health and development of the child. Innate characteristics of the caregiver is important, but the resources, skills, and abilities are also important. And for a caregiver to be able to give responsive caregiving, physical and mental wellness is important. But unfortunately, with increasing disasters, we will have much more post-traumatic disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, stress, anxiety, substance abuse, depression, violence, aggression, and that will all limit the capacity of the parents for responsive caregiving. In a study in Mexico City, it has been shown that by air pollution, the risk of having postpartum depression, early or late, has increased nearly twice. And that will also decrease the abilities of the parents for responsive caregiving. It's not only about responsive caregiving, but intrauterine stress due to the inflammatory milieu will program the child for an adverse psycho-emotional development, for more psychopathologies, as well as non-communicable diseases. But that stress, intrauterine stress, is not only related with the mother, but also it has been shown that preconceptional stress in the father can also epigenetically alter the sperm characteristics so that the offspring may have much more non-communicable diseases. After that, being born preterm, being in stress, having not receiving caregiving and responsive caregiving, and maybe increased abuse and neglect will alter the brain architecture, learning and memory capacity, and also that will also have a negative impact on all the children. And that will bring us back to early learning and education, because we know that that's the most cost-effective intervention that the children can receive. Yes, it is very cost-effective and it's a child's right, it's part of the nurturing care, but what's the situation? Unfortunately, in sub-Saharan Africa and Middle East and North Africa, only 1/4 of the children can receive early childhood education. And when we look to the countries with the highest environmental risk, they have the lowest early child education opportunities. When we come to pre-primary, only 1 year attendance. Again, half of the 20 countries have less than 80% attendance for the children, and 5 of them have less than 50% attendance. And we know that ongoing disasters will disrupt the educational system, and that will decrease the chance of children for a good education and for fulfilling their full potential. Not only the disasters, but also extreme heat has been related with less schooling. In Southeast Asia, it has been shown that during the interregnum period or early childhood, if the child has been exposed to higher than 2 standard deviations of extreme weather, then their schooling has decreased by 1.5 years. And again, contrarily, but fortunately, in Africa, it has been shown that if the child has been exposed to falls, for rainfalls, then their schooling has been increased by 2.6 years. So that will be an advantage for them. Unfortunately, those children who have been exposed to El Nino while they were at their early childhood period still had 10 to 20% lower memory and visual spatial thinking scores when after 5 years of the event compared to their peers. But I would like to end with some good news. As Dr. Bol has also emphasized, early climate education is very important. A study conducted among high school students, even 16% of the high school students receiving climate education in high and middle income countries will be able to save us 19 gigatons of carbon dioxide emission, which will be equal or which will be more better than electric vehicles or installation of the buildings. So as a last word for sustainable environment and for early childhood education, we all have to be aware, we all have to advocate, and we all have to act, as personally, as professionally, and as politically. And I would like to thank you again for the attention and for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Professor Özmert. Clearly, early childhood is the foundation for the rest of a child's life, and I think you've shown us what broad, sweeping impact climate change can have in early childhood and beyond. Our next speaker is Professor Ruth Etzel, who for many of you may need no introduction, but she's going to talk to us today about climate change in adolescence. Professor Etzel is a courageous leader, bringing environmental health risks to children to public attention and working collaboratively toward solutions. In 2007, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency honored her with a special award, the Children's Environmental Health Champion Award, for outstanding leadership in protecting children from environmental health risks. A pediatrician and preventive medicine specialist, Professor Etzel served as the Senior Officer for Environmental Health Research at the WHO in Geneva from 2009 to 2012. And she is the founding editor of an influential book, Pediatric Environmental Health, published by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Professor Etzel is the co-chair of the Environmental Health Strategic Advisory Group for the IPA, and for her persistence in speaking truth to power, she is often known as an inconvenient pediatrician, which I think is quite an honor. Over to you, Professor Etzel, to talk about climate change in adolescence. Please unmute.
Okay.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'll try to share my screen now. I may have to ask the organizers to bring up the screen.
Excellent.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks. Please go ahead.
So, Good day to everyone, and thank you for that very kind introduction, Dr. Patterson, and a special thanks to our IPA president, Dr. Enver, because I salute him for making climate change an important priority during his presidency. Today, I'll be building on what you've already learned from the previous speakers with a special focus on adolescents. Could you move the screen one forward, please? Next slide. I wanted to show you this slide first because it reminds us that only about 20% of our health status can actually be attributed to healthcare itself. The other 80% depends on social and structural determinants and ecological determinants. And I show this slide first because one of the most important points from today's webinar, I think, is that we need to work collectively as pediatricians to address these ecological determinants which have landed us in the current climate crisis. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you about 3 cases, and these are cases from the United States, but I'm guessing that you may have similar cases in your country. Let me tell you about a healthy 10-year-old boy. He was a 5th grade student, and he took a swim in a popular lake in Central Florida. 5 nights later, he had a headache. His parents took his temperature, but he had no fever. But he also had a flexible neck. 24 hours later, however, he was hallucinating. Next slide, please. Within 12 hours, he started seizing. And in the following 12 hours, he became febrile and was placed on antibiotics, but went into septic shock and died. The autopsy showed Naegleria in his brain, heart, spleen, and lungs. And the pathologist determined that his death was due to primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. Next slide, please. This slide shows a map of the United States with known cases of Naegleria. In the old days, Naegleria infections occurred mostly in the southern United States, but now it seems to be moving northward. In 2010, there was even a case as far north as Minnesota. The CDC commonly refers to this amoeba as heat-loving because it's a parasite that loves warm water. And many, if not all, cases in our country occurred after local heat waves. The infection occurs when water containing Naegleria enters the nose, usually while a person is swimming or driving or diving, and then the amoeba migrates from the nose to the brain, destroys brain tissue, and causes cerebral edema. Next slide, please. There are a number of steps that have been recommended to prevent this awful infection. For example, kids can wear nose clips or keep their head above water when they're swimming in warm water. We can warn kids not to force water up their nose, for example, with an outdoor hose. And we as pediatricians can be sure to take a good environmental and play history. But here's the elephant in the room. If Naegleria is increasing because of more heat waves, wouldn't we want to take action to prevent those heat waves? That's what I like to call primordial prevention. Next slide, please. This is the prevention triangle. On the top is tertiary prevention. This consists mostly of disease treatment. The diagnosis of amoebic meningoencephalitis is a grim one. Only about 4 out of 148 cases in the United States have survived in the last 40 years. So tertiary prevention includes treatment with amphotericin B and other medications, just to try to save the patient's life. Below is secondary prevention. So secondary prevention involves early recognition of disease by considering this diagnosis, which is given an unusual diagnosis. Just below this is primary prevention. So primary prevention includes reducing the risk factors for getting water up the nose by using nose clips or avoiding diving in warm water. And at the bottom of the triangle is the prevention that I prefer, which is primordial prevention. Primordial prevention involves maintaining the conditions that minimize hazards to health. In this case, primordial prevention means reducing emissions of carbon dioxide into the air, because it's carbon dioxide that leads to more heat waves. So environmental health is all about practicing primordial prevention at the bottom of the prevention triangle. Next slide, please. So on to the second case. Next slide, please. This is a case that occurred in Wisconsin. A previously healthy 18-year-old boy and his friends jumped into a pond on a golf course for a late night swim after drinking some alcohol. The pond was covered with green scum, but they may not have seen it because it was dark. One day later, the teen started having seizures. He was brought to the emergency department and died in hospital just 2 days later. An infectious disease workup in the hospital was negative and no cause of the seizure could be identified. Next slide, please. A detailed investigation by the Department of Health ruled out any infection, but a toxin called anatoxin A was found in the boy's stomach and in his brain. Now, you may not have heard of anatoxin A. It's a very potent toxin, and it's got a second name. It's called very fast death factor. It was first discovered when several herds of cattle died after drinking water from ponds that were covered with algal blooms. Anatoxin A is a nasty toxin, and it's one of many neurotoxins produced by harmful algal blooms. In the end, the state coroner made a final determination that this boy's death was caused by anatoxin A. Next slide, please. Now, you've probably all seen lakes and ponds that look like the picture on the left. And you may have even seen signs like the one on the right, warning about the hazards of toxic algae. But many pediatricians still think of this as a problem for veterinarians and not for pediatricians. Our colleagues who are veterinarians know all about algal blooms, mainly because dogs don't read signs and they jump right into lakes and ponds that are covered with algal blooms. And often dogs die as a result. But death in humans is extremely uncommon. Next slide, please. Now, harmful algal blooms also have many non-fatal health effects, like rashes, such as the one shown on the right side of the slide, as well as gastroenteritis, nausea, and vomiting from drinking contaminated water. As Dr. Bol mentioned, there was a toxic algal bloom in Lake Erie in 2014 that shut down the drinking water supply to 400,000 people in a city in Ohio. Such harmful algal blooms are becoming much more common as temperatures rise. Next slide, please. On to the next case. Next slide, please. The third case is an 18-year-old football player who was practicing in 2018. And while working out, he began struggling to run. He complained of cramping, and then he collapsed. 30 minutes later, he had a seizure. He was brought to the emergency room, and his body temperature was 41 degrees centigrade when he got there. He later died of heat stroke after having an emergency liver transplant. Next slide, please. So there are many concerns for adolescents, and these are three of the most severe. But one of the things that they have in common is all three of these serious health effects are linked to a changing climate. You know, we often think about heat waves as being particularly risky for the elderly, and that's true. But national figures show that the relative risk of mortality, even for youth aged 11 to 20, is increased for death during a heat wave. Next slide, please. So there's a mnemonic that we teach our medical students, and it goes like this: heat wave. H for heat illness, E for exacerbation of heart and lung conditions, A for asthma, T for traumatic injury, W for water and foodborne illness, A for allergies, V for vector-borne disease, and E for emotional stress. Next slide, please. I mentioned emotional stress, as did Dr. Bol, and I want to point out that many studies have been done about the effect, the psychological effect of the climate crisis on young adults. This was a slide of study results from the United States. And the results showed that the most severely impacted appeared to be young adults between the ages of 18 and 29. Here shown in the second column from the left. 68% of them said that the climate crisis made them feel afraid. 66% said that they thought the climate crisis made them feel motivated. 53% said it made them feel angry. 66% said it made them feel helpless. 54% said it made them feel guilty. 25% said it made them feel optimistic, and 10% were uninterested. Next slide, please. These results should not be surprising, as they're the reason that so many youth have taken to the streets to protest, sometimes skipping school on Fridays to make their voices heard. Next slide, please. I think I'll pause to talk about how we got to this place. Next slide, please. We got to this place because we have an insatiable need for more. Next slide, please. The industrialized countries are consuming fossil fuels at a staggering pace. Next slide, please. And so teens are taking action. About 1 in 4 teens in the United States say that they have taken some action to express their views on climate in the past 3 years. Some participated in protests, rallies, or other events. Others participated in school walkouts. Some mailed letters or emailed or phoned government officials. Next slide, please. The climate crisis we currently face reminds me of the story of Marie Curie. As you probably remember, she died of radiation. What you may not know is that for her entire life, she denied that her illness had anything to do with radiation. And this is a part of a poem by Adrienne Rich that says, "She died a famous woman, denying her wounds. Denying her wounds came from the same source as her power." So the industrialized countries have built an economy that was based on fossil fuel. And now we're having a difficult time facing the fact that we may have sown the seeds of future destruction of many species, possibly including our own. Next slide, please. We need to keep saying over and over again, as beautifully as we can, that this situation is of our own creation, and it can be ended as it began, by the power of our choices. Next slide, please. We can focus on choices at 5 levels. Our personal choices matter, our practice choices matter, our hospital choices matter, our teaching choices matter, and our advocacy choices matter. Next slide. As Dr. Aparna mentioned, when you take steps that are good for the environment, it's often a win-win situation because They're usually good for health as well. When you walk or take a bicycle to work, you burn calories instead of carbon. More active transport cleans the air and fights obesity. When you eat fresh, local, and lower on the food chain, it supports local farms and the local economy, improves nutritional quality, and lowers the risk of chronic diseases. And of course, energy efficiency saves money, and we know that well supports health. Next slide. So how do your practice choices matter? Next slide. We suggest that you bring environmental issues up in conversation with adolescents in your practice. Next slide, please. For example, when an adolescent presents with asthma, you might approach it by saying something like, climate change and air pollution are caused by the same thing, burning fossil fuels. Together, they make air quality worse, and that can make lung disease worse. Checking air quality and avoiding busy roadways when you go out for exercise can help to protect you. Next slide, please. We also have teaching choices. Next slide, please. The WHO has done a wonderful job of putting together information about the effects of health and environment for both medicine and nursing school curricula. You can get them at the website shown here. Next slide, please. Finally, your advocacy choices matter. Next slide, please. We should be following the lead of the youth. Teenagers are raising their voices. You know, climate change was first on the front page of the New York Times back in 1989. And youth have been speaking out about it for more than 30 years. One of the first to do so was Severin Suzuki, who at age 12 spoke at the Rio Conference on Environment and Development. And she said, if you don't know how to fix it, please stop breaking it. Next slide, please. But the teenagers are now telling us we lack support. Our future is in danger. Please communicate transparently and take us seriously because climate change is a huge problem. Next slide, please. All of us need to engage because this is a really hard problem and we have no time to lose. So we should be following the lead of the youth and speaking out on their behalf. Next slide, please. One of my favorite proverbs is an old Chinese proverb, and I'd like to end with it. It says, be not afraid of going slowly. Be only afraid of standing still. Next slide, please. The pediatric societies are not standing still. You heard from Aparna Bol about the AAP's statements on climate change. And the IPA, the International Pediatric Association, has also put out a declaration about the pediatric imperative to respond to the impact of climate change on children. It was published in October 2021, and you can find it on this link. Next slide, please. So thank you for all you do, and we look forward to the end of this seminar and our conversations together.
Thank you so much, Dr. Etzel. It was a really nice presentation. I saw from the comment from the audience, I think Dr. Etzel, also the chair of our sect of the environmental. I think we have a lot of homework, Ruth, after this webinar. Okay, I think we go to the next, last presentation. The impact of disaster due to the climate change on the health of problem of Indonesian children. I would like to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Kurniawan Gaddafi. He's a consultant and head of disaster management task force of Indonesian Pediatric Society, as well as lecturer at the medical faculty at Brawijaya University, Malang, Indonesia. As a consultant of pediatric emergency and intensive care, Dr. Gaddafi patient in the field of pediatric emergency is well reflected in his exceptional first-hand experience in taking part various emergency relief efforts, including in the Palu tsunami, Lombok earthquake in 2018, the humanitarian disaster in Papua, in Asmat in 2018, and most recently, the volcano, the Mount Sumeru eruption in 2021. Besides his hands-on experience in emergency relief, Dr. Gaddafi is also a distinguished author of 7 books under his name, including Overcoming Emergency in Children, 2018, Fluid Resuscitation, Choosing the Right Fluid for Children, 2017, and Understanding Your Child Health Problem, 2016. Dr. Gaddafi is an active member of the International Pediatric Association Children in Humanitarian Emergency Strategic Advisory Group. Your time, Dr. Gaddafi, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. Aman, my mentor. Thank you for the nice introduction. Thank you the opportunity. Today, I would like to present my topic about the impact of disaster due to climate change on the health of Indonesian children. This is the outline. For the first, I would like to share about Indonesian topography. Indonesia has a unique topography because Indonesia is in meeting point of 3 plates in the world, which are Eurasian plate, Indo-Australian plate, and Philippine plates. Consequently, Indonesia is at risk for earthquake disaster. Besides that, Indonesia is in Pacific Ring of Fire. Indonesia has more than 500 volcanoes, of which 129 are active. So the situation caused many people call Indonesia as a disaster supermarket. Indonesia had a variety of topography such as mountains, valleys, forest and river, and many thousands of islands. This makes Indonesia prone to disaster. What about the climate change in Indonesia? Indonesia has climate change problem due to the forest fire. This is the illustration.
This thick blanket of smoke is known in Southeast Asia as the haze. Every year during the dry season from June to October, Indonesia sets massive forest fires to clear land for agriculture. The resulting smog periodically envelops the country's furious Southeast Asian neighbors, including Singapore and Malaysia. Deforestation creates about the same amount of greenhouse gases each year as cars, airplanes, and other modes of transport combined. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, the fires have made Indonesia one of the world's worst global warming offenders. So here's the situation. The fires come from paper and palm oil plantations that use illegal slash and burn techniques, 20 times cheaper than other methods for clearing land. Indonesia produces about half of the world's $50 billion palm oil crop each year, which is widely used in products like mayonnaise and makeup. There is some good news about the world's rainforest, though. Globally, the rate of deforestation per year has slowed by 1/3 to about 5.2 million hectares. To put that in perspective, we've gone from destroying forests twice the size of Belgium to the size of Denmark. A lot of that improvement can be seen in Brazil's Amazon. You can see that in 2011, Indonesia overtook Brazil as the #1 country for forest loss.
We said that Indonesia has also climate change problem due to air pollution. This is the situation. Jakarta ranked #1 to the city with the worst air quality in the world. In Jakarta, manufacturing can cause increase of carbon dioxide emission. Both of the condition, forest fire and air pollution, may increase climate change in the world. The pattern of climate change in Indonesia has been evident in last 30 years. In the last 30 years, the air temperature in Indonesia has risen by about 0.1 degrees Celsius. The risk of hydrometeorological natural disaster has been increased, like the flood. Following its data, climate change related to natural disaster in Asia. Flood disaster is highest problem natural disaster in Asia. The impact of climate change on disaster in Indonesia. Data from the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, Indonesia ranked number 1 of 265 countries for tsunami hazard. Indonesia ranked number 1 out of 160 countries for landslide. Indonesia ranked number 3 out of 153 countries for earthquake. And Indonesia ranked number 6 out of 160 countries for flood. And flood disaster is highest problem natural disaster in Indonesia. We can classify the natural disaster caused by climate change with the several types. For the first is geological hazard. Geological hazards include internal earth processes such as earthquake, volcanic activity, and geophysical process. One of geological hazards is Palu earthquake. This is the situation during Palu earthquake. Indonesian Pediatric Society replaced pediatricians as victim in Palu until stable condition. The other type of natural disaster caused by the climate change is hydrometeorological hazard. Hydrometeorological hazard include tropical cyclone, thunderstorm, hailstorm, tornado, and flood. Indonesia is situated along equator, and Indonesia has two seasons, dry season and rain season. So the flood has been the most frequent disaster for Indonesia. This is the situation during Indonesian flood. Flood disaster in Indonesia has many human casualty and economic loss. The biological hazards is the biological substance that poses a threat to health of living organisms, include exposure to the pathogenic microorganism toxin and bioactive substance. And the other type of the natural disaster caused by the climate change, and it is very common in Indonesia, is epidemical hazard. Epidemical hazards had strong connected with disease outbreak. The disease outbreak may potentially occur in Indonesia, particularly considering the fact that many Indonesian people are still living below the poverty line, cannot access to the healthy facility and hygienic life. One of epidemical hazard is outbreak, measles, and malnutrition in Asmat, Papua. Many children are malnourished, and in this situation, hospital cannot accommodate the patient, so the patient is placed in carts the hall. And Indonesian Pediatric Society come to Asmat, provide the treatment and carrying out the mass immunization. What about the impact of disaster due to climate change on the health problem of Indonesian children? Following is data, number, and percentage of people affected by disaster type. Earthquake is most frequent of disaster in Indonesia, cause human casualty. Besides that, earthquake is most frequent of disaster in Indonesia, cause the economic loss. In Indonesia, 80% disaster are associated climate change in 1998 to 2018, including flooding, storm, landslide, and others. The impact of geological hazard to the health problem in Indonesian children, we can look in Lombok earthquake. This is the situation in Lombok earthquake. Disaster Management Task Force of Indonesian Pediatric Society come to the Lombok today after earthquake. Indonesian Pediatric Society provide the treatment and provide the psychological support to children in the refugee camp. In the first week of Lombok earthquake, many children experience trauma cases. This is the data from the Lombok earthquake. There are different types of disease between the first week and fourth week. In the first week, the children experience a lot of respiratory tract infection. But in fourth week, the children experience a lot of gastrointestinal tract infection. Why? Because until the fourth week, the people still live in the refugees camp. And in the refugees camp, there are the crowded situation. We said that diseases such as diarrhea are easily contagious, and we said that the other problem, the most of medical volunteers have left from Lombok. The impact of epidemical hazard to Indonesian children in 1928, in 2018 and 2019, there were 3,855 natural disasters occurred in Indonesia. In early 2018, an outbreak of measles and malnutrition in asthma, which caused 202 patients were treated in Agas Hospital. This is the situation during outbreak of measles and malnutrition in Asmat, Papua. During outbreak, severe malnutrition and epidemic of asthma, of measles disease in Asmat, Indonesian Pediatric Society carrying out mass immunization and provide the treatment for children with a complex complication. Since September 2017 to April 2018, there are 522 patients with the malnutrition and 651 with the measles. Why in Asmat, Papua, there are the outbreak of measles and malnutrition? Because the lifestyle of Asmat community is more dependent on nature. The life by foraging in forests and drinking water release on stored rainwater. So in the long dry season will cause problem for Asmat community. And if there are the long dry season will cause reduced food resource and reduced water. And this situation can cause the malnutrition in the children in Asmat. The problem, epidemical hazard in Indonesia is dengue outbreak. Dengue is disease that associated with the environmental condition. Climate change will lead to dengue transmission pattern. Strong correlation was found between the humidity and dengue incident. Temperature has positive association with the dengue incident. The impact of geological hazard to the health problem in Indonesian children, like in Mount Semeru eruption. This is the situation during Mount Semeru eruption. In Mount Semeru eruption, many houses destroyed, and many people and children is placed in the refugees camp. Indonesian Pediatric Society provide psychological support and provide the treatment in the refugees camp during Mount Semeru eruption. difference with the Lombok Earthquake natural disaster, the type of disease in Mount Semeru eruption from first week until five week, many children experience a lot of respiratory tract infection. Why? Because during the catastrophic eruption of Mount Semeru, several repeated eruptions occurred. As a result, volcanic ash will often be released, and children are more susceptible to respiratory tract infection. What about the emotional and psychological problem in children during the Mount Semeru eruption? There are no problem in emotional and psychogenic problem during Mount Semeru eruption. We calculate with the pediatric emotional distress scale. And the last problem in Indonesia is forest fire hazard. The highest incidence of forest fire hazard in 2015 caused the respiratory problem, especially in children, pregnant women, and elderly people. The exposure to high concentration can cause persistent cough, wheezing, and difficulty breathing. And we have to prevent the climate change with the reduce of private physical reforestation, reduce the use of air condition, implementing reduce, reuse, and recycle. And the end, my slide, I would like to give the conclusion. Climate change can be caused by natural process and as a result of human action. And we can prevent climate change starting with ourselves by being kind to nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kadafi. Now we're going to move to the Q&A session. I appreciate you all staying with us. I know that this is running over a bit of time, but there's so much valuable, rich information and examples and experiences that have been shared here today. So we're going to look at some of the questions that came from the audience during the talks. The first one is directed to all of you. It says, this is truly an eye-opener and grateful for the well-articulated presentations. Can you please speak to the advocacy approaches and lobbying opportunities as we raise awareness and have our voices heard? I'll ask you, perhaps, Dr. Etzel, to respond to that one first. And you're still on mute. Please unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm very happy to see that people are wondering what kind of advocacy we should be doing. And when I talk about advocacy, I remember a very famous politician in the United States who said, when I feel the heat, I see the light. And so our job as pediatricians, and also the job of any other civil servants who want to do advocacy, I believe, is to put some heat on our politicians. Our politicians never move unless they are pressed to do so by an anxious public. And we know that the teenagers are anxious and they have been pressing the politicians. But of course, in most countries, teenagers do not vote. And so that's why I believe we need to follow the lead of the teenagers and put heat on the politicians, because we are voters and we need to tell the politicians that we will vote them out unless they take action to reduce the use of fossil fuels. I think it's pretty much the same in every country. They will only do so if forced by the electorate. And so we need to put lots of pressure on them and force them to do what's right.
Thank you so much. I know, Dr. Bol, you also spoke a bit about advocacy. Could you comment on this question, please?
Question is about opportunities for action and how we can really move from awareness to action. So I concur with everything Dr. Etzel said. I think, to go back to my point about our credibility as advocates, it's actually been studied what kinds of messages and messengers really help to motivate policy change and sort of political will around climate action. And health professionals, especially pediatric health professionals, are consistently some of the most trusted messengers. And I also think we do have such a unique opportunity to join forces with youth climate activists, because we have sort of a natural allyship. And so I think being able to work with amplifying youth climate activists and joining together in framing climate action as a child health imperative, those I think are incredibly meaningful for policymakers and for the public, as Dr. Etzel said, to really build that political will to create the policy change that we need.
Thank you. Professor Osmer, do you have a comment on this topic?
Well, I would just like to thank Ruth and Aparna for their wonderful answers, but I would just like to add something about our, maybe as a pediatrician, daily activities. Maybe we can start advocating, besides making awareness, we can start advocating while we are also giving healthcare to the children or to the families, while we are just talking about breastfeeding, while we are just talking about locally available food to the child that we are going to give, while we are just talking about what to buy as toys for their children, as what to read about the climate change, maybe to their children, just starting from there. Or we can also start advocating from our institution. We can just start recycling, or we can just start reducing, and we can just make a model of action so that we can just put much more power on the politicians. So I think that we also have to start from just from the as a professional, from giving healthcare services to the families. Thank you.
Excellent suggestions. Thank you. Dr. Gaddafi, do you have a comment?
Okay. Because my topic is disaster related with the climate change. So maybe I would like to describe in the background with the disaster. At the time of the disaster, Indonesia Pediatric Society always come to the disaster area. And in this area, Indonesian Pediatric Society will find the problem. From this problem, we provide recommendation to the government. And after the disaster stopped, sometimes we give suggestion to the government to building the system to prevent the effect of the disaster. We said that I hear and I read in the statement of the government, Indonesian government have the commit to reduce of the carbon dioxide emission with the reforestation in Indonesia. So we can give the example or the some case in the natural disaster. We give the recommendation, provide the recommendation to government, and I think the government think about relationship between the natural disaster with climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we'll go to a new question now. Over to you, Dr. Pulungan.
Okay. From Telosky, question, suggestion. How can we add positive action that our young people can take? My concern is that we just stop awareness. The young person will take only despair and fear. How about things that youth can do to contribute to improvement? Any suggestion? I think I will offer this also to all four speakers, because I think most of the speakers also mentioned about involving our young adolescents about climate change. Please, I think the first one, I think, is Dr. Bol. Over to you, Dr. Bol.
Sure. I think, we spoke a little bit to that in our last comment. I think it's a good question. And the first thing I would say is that people talk a lot about anxiety in youth. And I think, many of our youth activists have shared with me, that the people that I work with, that, anxiety kind of implies worry out of proportion with a perceived threat. And I think it's really important to validate with young people that this is not that. This is that their worries are real and relate to a real threat. And they also have a tremendous amount of power. The other thing I guess I would say too, to preface my comments, it's not really fair that it's falling to youth to fight for a healthy planet for their future. They're doing it and they're doing an amazing job, but I think it's also important to validate that, like, you have a lot of power, but it's not fair that it's falling on you to advocate for a healthy future for yourself. That's really our job as adults, to be the authors of those solutions. So I think really being honest about that and trying to really be in partnership with our youth. And when it comes to opportunities for action, some examples I think might be, and depending on the age of the youth, whatever's developmentally appropriate, I think there are actions that youth can take among their peers and teachers to educate about the importance of climate action. They can also model, we can do activities as families to model what it means to demonstrate environmental stewardship and care for the planet. They can participate in advocacy as letter writers and organizers. We've seen youth doing that, incredibly powerfully. And also, I think increasingly, as we think about inclusive and community-based policy design around climate action, youth really need to be at the table in designing those policies, especially youth in frontline communities. So those are a few examples, and I'd love to hear what others think about that question.
Thank you, Dr. Bol. How about you, Dr. Etzel? Yes, some of your case also, related to adolescents.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I definitely agree with everything that Dr. Bol said, and I wanted to add one more point, and that is that we as adults can help the youth to make the link between commercialism and hyper-consuming, that they are urged to consume by all the advertisers, that they need to have new shoes, that they need to have new clothes, that they have to consume. And we need to make the link for them so they can connect the dots between this hyper consumption that goes on in our society and the use of energy. And so to the extent that they can become aware of the ways that they are being urged to consume too much and the fact that this is what is driving energy use, then they can halt that hyper consumption that the advertisers urge them to do on a daily basis. And that, I think, can be an important step in changing their own behaviors and the behaviors of their fellow teens.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Etzel. And Professor Osman, I would like also your comment, especially related, how do you involve your experience also in refugee related also to the environmental, I think? Because you have been doing it a lot, I think.
I'm not sure I understood the question right. You're asking how the climate change will affect the refugees? Or
yes. Yeah, involving also the adolescents related to the
okay.
spatial population.
Yes, as far as the studies that we have conducted in the refugees as an adolescent population, we have found that, when they were staying in the refugee camps, and as the period has been extended, when it came up to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, well, they really had a high hostility against the community that they are living in. So perhaps what we have to do is that for all those who have been displaced, we have to act quickly so that they can just accommodate to the new community they have reached. And we have also seen that those adolescents that really had the most problems were those who were not at school and also who were not working. So we really have to give something to the adolescents so that they can express themselves, they can develop themselves, they can feel the dignity about themselves. So that was what we have experienced most about the adolescents in the refugee camps and their adaptation to the community. Maybe that can be also seen in the internal displacements due to disasters that we will be seeing much more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rosman. Dr. Gaddafi, we know that your experience has in years, so many kinds of disaster, but maybe you can share at least maybe one or two, maybe your experience in Papua during the disaster in Asmat, and maybe one of the earthquake probably in Lombok related. How do you involve the adolescents during that period? Is it possible during that period you involve adolescents or after that one? Short answer, please, because we are running out of time. Please, Dr. Gaddafi.
Thank you, Prof. Aman. If you look the problem in Asmat, it is very strong correlated with the nature, especially the problem malnutrition. It is had a strong correlated with the prolonged of dry season, and indirectly we can look the other side of Indonesia has a money factory that it is can cause the global warming maybe. So in Indonesia, many young people, especially maybe adolescents and the other, have an innovative spirit. For the example, some young people have the one program, garbage bank. They collect the garbage and after that give the some monies for the other, and after that they recycle again. We said that the related with the Asmat, there are some innovative program to sell the goods. After that, the buyer got the plan to plantation or to reforestation in the forest. The other condition directly to change in Lombok or in Asmat, maybe it is very strong correlation with the traditional problem in Asmat. It is maybe have any policy for the government to explanation for the of the people in Papua to give some motivation. For the example, in Papua now have the reforestation programs to decrease of the climate change in Indonesia. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, Dr. Patterson, yeah, I give it to you. I don't know whether we still have time, maybe 1 minute. Maybe you can make a conclusion or take a question. Over to you, Dr. Patterson. So many questions.
A rapid fire question to wrap us up. May I ask the IPA to show us the remaining questions? Thank you. Okay. Is there any specific curriculum in school about climate change or other experience on how to make adolescents care about climate change? So I'm going to direct that just to Dr. Etzel as our final question.
Thank you. There are many excellent curricula about climate change for school children, and I will have to provide those to Dr. Pulangan at a later date so that he can share with his colleagues. But the educators have done a really good job of integrating this into both primary and secondary education. And so you don't have to start from scratch. You can use what the educators have provided and do a good job of introducing it to school children, no matter what the level.
Thank you so much, Professor. Okay, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Helena, to wrap us up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Patterson. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to extend our warmest round of gratitude and appreciation to all our speakers, moderators, and participants for making the Effects of Climate Change on Child Health webinar a joint collaboration between the International Pediatric Association, Indonesian Pediatric Society, Turkish National Pediatric Society, and the American Academy of Pediatrics a great success. We hope that this webinar has equipped you to become agents of change, champions regarding climate change and child health in your respective countries and communities. Furthermore, the International Pediatric Association also conducts routine webinars. To keep yourself updated, kindly follow IPA on the social media platforms as detailed on the slide. Once again, we thank you for your enthusiasm and we look forward to welcoming you in our next event.